because what is called the peace process that began in 1967 is taking place on Mars, on the moon. This is the only peace process in history that I know of that had no relevance whatsoever with the problem it was supposed to solve. What they were talking about in Geneva in 1977, in Madrid in 1991, in Oslo in 1993, had very little to do with the essence of the problem. It dealt with the symptoms, I agree. It dealt with the symptoms, but not with the essence. And this is the second greatest Israeli success. That not only the public opinion does not deal with the essence, but also the peace process very successfully succeeds in avoiding it. So if you go back to history, and you are using today the right language, you are not anachronistic, as someone was trying to say this morning. You are not anachronistic. You are actually a very relevant, updated person. I'll explain what I mean. If you say that Zionism is colonialism, you are the youngest and most updated student of history I've met. Anyone who will try to deter you by saying this is anachronism, this is not helpful, this is anti-Semitism, is anachronistic and lives on the moon or in Mars and can continue to talk about something which has nothing to do with what's going on the ground. Actually, if you know Hebrew, you know that the whole Hebrew language from 1882 until today, which was constructed to describe what the Zionist movement is doing in Palestine, uses again and again the word hityashvut, hitnachalut. And the only way of translating these words is to colonize. There's no other translation. So the Zionist movement in the late 19th century, when colonialism had a very good public relations, was very gladly using the word to colonize. But then they learned that colonialism was not so popular. So they translated it differently. They found the word settlement, which means something else in English. And they found the word, they said, yes, it's colonized, but it's not like colonized. It's a different kind. Again, it's complex. And only we, the Israeli Jews, understand why Israeli colonization and white colonization in Africa is not the same. If you're not an Israeli Jew, you don't understand it. If you're not a Zionist Israeli Jew, of course you cannot understand it. And I think this is important to bring back in our teaching in schools, in our approach to the public, in our negotiations with the political elite in this country and in the West, to say to them, you are dealing with the last colonialist project. And as bizarre as it sounds, even in the 21st century, this colonialist project employs the same tactics of colonialism in the 19th century. And I think that every decent person in the West, like in the time of colonialism, would not stand on the side of colonialism. But you have to clean your language. You have to clean your mind, and you have to think that it's totally irrelevant what people say about what you say. It doesn't matter what they say. They will regard you as anti-Semitic even if you support the two-state solution. Because it means you don't support the two-state solution as they understand it. Because you don't understand the problem. You think that this two-state solution is a sovereign, independent state over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. No, you don't understand it. The state for the Palestinians are two Bantustans, divided to 12 in the West Bank, contained in a concentration camp in Gaza, has no connection between it, has a little municipality in Ramallah which would be called the government. This is a state. And if you don't understand that this is a state, it shows that you still have to learn about the complexity of the conflict. Now, colonialism is one message from the past that we should accept and we should deal with. And we should recruit the veteran as well as the younger cohorts of activists to work for something which universally should be very easy to recruit people for. The fight against colonialism. The fight against the idea that someone from the outside has the right to demolish the life of people in the inside. And they have done it in 1882, they have done it in 1948, and they have done it yesterday in the Nakba or in the West Bank, and they're going to do it next week if we will continue to talk about peace negotiations, two-state solutions, all kinds of irrelevant concepts that have nothing to do with the realities on the ground. The second concept from the past, which I think we should insist on conveying to people, whether we try to protest against something that Israel is doing today, or whether we will commemorate in January what Israel had done in the Gaza Strip, or when we commemorate in May the crime that Israel committed in 1948. And this is the ethnic cleansing. It is a concept that was developed, of course, in the 1990s more clearly because of what happened in the Balkan Wars. But even before that, this was regarded by the international community as an unacceptable ideology and policy. Only genocide is regarded by the international community as worse than ethnic cleansing. And quite often the two are interconnected, as we can see in other places and as we can see in Israel and Palestine. When you are allowed to pursue a policy of ethnic cleansing, don't be surprised if these perpetrators would one day move to genocide. Because in both cases you have to totally dehumanize the people you are expelling or massacring. Even if they are children, they have to be totally dehumanized. And anybody who lived in Israel long enough, as I did, knows that the main corruption of people through the military service is the total dehumanization of the Palestinians. That's why a soldier, when he sees a Palestinian baby, he doesn't see a baby. He sees a potential enemy. And the road from kicking out the baby from the house or killing the baby is not very long. And I think that the message of ethnic cleansing is the message of criminalizing not the policies of the State of Israel, but criminalizing the State of Israel. And we should do this. We should do this because only a fascist approach to life would say that in every historical condition, a state and the country is the same thing. No, it is not. Sometimes the state is the worst thing that can happen to a country. And the worst thing that happened to Palestine is the State of Israel. And if we want to make the country of Palestine a place where people could live as equals, in fact live in many ways better than in other parts of the Middle East, maybe even better in some parts of Europe, is to bring the country back at the expense of the state. And I know this is not easy, and this is not about questioning the right of a state to exist. We are individuals, we are activists, we don't have the power to challenge the right of states to exist. We cannot eliminate states. Israel has the power to eliminate states. We don't have the power to eliminate states. What we have is a moral power to say to people that the kind of state that you have founded and the kind of state that you are maintaining is destructive to the country in which you exist. It has led in 1948, the creation of that state, led to the expulsion of half of the native population of Palestine. Show me any other situation in history where the international community, under the slogan of peace, would come and say, in order to make this country a peaceful place, I have to kick out half of the people who live there. Only in Israel and Palestine we have this bizarre historical moment where the United Nations, embodying the international community's will, is telling the world that it allows Israel to kick out half of Palestine's population in the name of peace. And once you start like this, the history of Israel, it's very difficult to retract and to explain that actually you have to study history and go back to 1947 and 1948 and say the partition, or the idea of partition, is an immoral idea. It's not even a good realpolitik idea. But that, of course, you couldn't know in 1947. I can understand that in 1947-48 you would have said, let's see if we divide the country into two, it may work. Who would have known? But 60 years later, can you argue that dividing this baby, if you want, is different from the Solomon trial? It's not surprising. You all know about the Solomon trial, right? You know about the baby and the two mothers, and that the real mother doesn't want the baby to be cut into two. We know who is the real mother in the case of Israel and Palestine. We know who was willing all the time, supposedly, to petition it. So, I think that the whole idea of the ethnic cleansing is connected to the international support for it, not direct support for it. But the agreement and the consent of the United Nations, and later on the European community, and later on the United States, to say that this is the way peace can only be possible in Palestine. That the Israelis kicked out enough Palestinians and took over enough of Palestine to create the only democracy in the Middle East. They corrupted every commonsensical language that we had in the West in the late 1940s and the early 1950s with the Zionist project. That's how you create democracies? By kicking out the indigenous population so that you can have a Jewish majority? Because what is called the peace process that began in 1967 is taking place on Mars, on the moon. This is the only peace process in history that I know of that had no relevance whatsoever with the problem it was supposed to solve. What they were talking about in Geneva in 1977, in Madrid in 1991, in Oslo in 1993, had very little to do with the essence of the problem. It dealt with the symptoms, I agree. It dealt with the symptoms, but not with the essence. And this is the second greatest Israeli success. That not only the public opinion does not deal with the essence, but also the peace process very successful and lives on the moon or in Mars and can continue to talk about something which has nothing to do with what's going on the ground. Actually, if you know Hebrew, you know that the whole Hebrew language from 1882 until today, which was constructed to describe what the Zionist movement is doing in Palestine, uses again, if you say that Zionism is colonialism, you are the youngest and most updated student of history I've met. Anyone who will try to deter you by saying this is anachronism, this is not helpful, this is anti-Semitism, is anachronistic. Fully succeeds in avoiding it. So if you go back to history, and you are using today the right language, you are not anachronistic, as someone was trying to say this morning. You are not anachronistic. You are actually a very relevant, updated person. I'll explain what